Moore.
Here.
Blazer.
Present.
Walker.
Excused.
D. Waterman. P. Waterman.
Here.
White.
Present.
Okay, we're gonna follow the agenda. Next on the agenda, we have public comment. Is there anyone from the public that would like to address the board? Okay. Could you, that financial information, could you pass some down there?
Which one?
Is there anyone from the public that would like to address the board? Hearing none, we'll go on to agenda changes. Do we have any agenda
Yes,
changes?
yes, sir, we have agenda changes. Under unfinished business, we'd like to amend that to include a resolution to amend the 2019 budget to bring it, the payroll expense in line with what it will be. Under new business, in your handouts, there is an update to our supplemental actuarial analysis policy. That would be a new item under new business. We would like to amend new business to add a resolution to put Piedmont on watch. They had a staff change, that information is in your handouts. And
Is that under new business?
under new business, yes, sir. And under new business in your handouts, there is a resolution as well as the backup for the decision that the finance committee came to regarding Sizer and the Addicts portfolio. And then there is a request to move the item under communications that's identified as correspondence to and from the city regarding the IRS filing. There's a recommendation to remove that from correspondence and make it an actual agenda item. And that's all I have, Mr. Moore.
Okay, now, communication, item is,
The fourth bullet point.
okay. That is something different, as I understand it, it's the information that, was requested in terms of answering those questions.
Yes. If I may, yeah, I do request that we look up for Ms. Munson because per your request to have the experts that the city has retained that gave you the answers pursuant to during our last several meetings. It is so that was the request that you had of me, and so I asked to do that because Ms. Copas is here, and of course the city is paying her to be here, so if we can move her up on the agenda so you can hear the answers now. Subsequent to the last meeting, where you had questions, I asked that those all be put in writing. Ms. Munson did do that, and for me on behalf of the board. And Ms. Copas has provided the answers to those questions in writing. So I hope everybody's had a chance to see them. I know they were in the package too. They're in the package too. But pursuant to your request, if those answers were not sufficient, or you still have additional questions about that, she's here to answer them. She was also at the council meeting yesterday as the city, as one of the city attorneys who was representing the city on this very important matter. And as we've said, this is the last matter for the GERS board vote to get this actuarial supplemental evaluation that's been requested now in order for the application to be able to go to the IRS for the employees to have the ruling made on whether their health care has a
Okay, so we have a number of different items under agenda changes. What is the pleasure of the board?
I'd make a motion that we move this to the front and get it out of the way.
Well, let's deal with it as the agenda changes first.
Okay.
But we have, how many agenda changes do we have?
I believe 5.
We have 5. Now, we can take them collectively, or if it's a desire of the board, we can deal with them individually. What is the pleasure? You indicated that, in terms
We're just
of,
dealing with agenda changes, I'll make a motion that we just vote for all the agenda changes
Okay.
collectively.
is there a second to that?
Second.
Second. And seconded. So that is a proper motion before us. Any discussion on the motion? Any questions on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. There's been a request that of the 5 agenda changes that we move Ms. Kopaz, is that, am I pronouncing that word right?
Kopaz, sir.
Kopaz, Ms. Kopaz, up to the top. I remind everyone here that this, of course, was voted on at our last meeting. There was a motion to, I think it was pretty much the general feeling of the board that we're not a party to this lawsuit, and that this lawsuit, of course, is between the city of Pontiac and the City of Pontiac Retired Employees Association. Our responsibility is to guarantee pensions, and that's what we're doing. And so for anyone that would, I guess I would take issue that we're not the holdup, we're not a party to the suit. We have absolutely nothing to do with the lawsuit. So for anyone to make it that this board is a holdup, in my opinion, is a misnomer, and it's also misleading. So with that, why don't we then, if you could, Ms. Kopaz, do you have a presentation you'd like to make, or you just want to take questions, or what is your pleasure?
You wanna, she sit over there, or she can sit here, okay?
It's fine, I'm happy to stand.
Would you rather?
That's
Okay.
fine.
All right.
As you are aware, I had asked for a request for a supplemental actuarial evaluation. The purpose of that request is just so that the city can get information, to have a range of what the excess assets is, so that they have a range to know which portion of the assets goes into the new GERS replacement and which portion goes into the new bucket for retiree health. As everybody in this room is aware, the Michigan Constitution prohibits the city from diminishing accrued financial benefits. We don't want to be in a situation where we take too much money out of the pension plan only from 50 years from now for somebody to say there's not money left, and the city to have a whole new lawsuit on its hands because of that. So the whole purpose of my request is solely to make sure that we just move the right amount of assets. This is gonna be a one bite at the apple type transaction. This is something that has not been done. Once we do it, it's not like we're gonna be able to terminate it again, and get more assets out. This is the only time we do it, and so we just wanna make sure that we have all information possible to make sure that the right amount of assets gets moved, pure and simple. And that's the purpose. I know you guys have all seen my email. I know it is not a popular email. If you have specific questions, I'm happy to address it.
So, is there any questions or comments? Go right ahead.
These are rhetorical questions, Ms. Kopaz. I know the answers to them because they keep coming up as they came up again last night in the conversation. I would just like you to reiterate again the answers to those, so everybody here at the board can also hear them. The range that you've set by the IRS is just relating to.
No, don't say by IRS, it wasn't set by IRS.
That's my question.
Okay,
You gotta say it,
let's
but just say, tell the truth.
let's, what we don't want to do today is that we want to take care of business, okay?
Yes.
Editorializing and stuff, that's not gonna get
No,
us anywhere.
I'm asking the question.
Okay, so
All right, let me rephrase.
if you have a specific question
I
that you
do.
ask Ms.
Let me
Lopez,
rephrase.
or if anybody else has a specific question,
I have a
let's,
specific question.
let's do it that way,
Okay.
okay?
All right, number one, you set certain percentages. The percentages you set have nothing to do, is that correct, with the valuation that is determined by this board, is that correct?
The percentage has nothing to do with the retirement allowances that pensioners will get. It has nothing to do with that. the only thing that the request has to do with is determining the amount of money that will get moved into the Viva.
So is it correct to say that anything you are doing in terms of the application will in no way affect the pension benefits that have been set by this board that the retirees will receive?
That is correct.
That is correct, okay. I just want to make sure that was correct because I hear from people that are being told various things. The other thing is that, that this board, we recognize that they do a full value set valuation, all right? And there's nothing that you're doing in terms of the application that will in any way infringe upon this board's responsibility or ability to do that. Is that correct? All right.
Well, let me-
Mr. Chairman, then my question is, why
All I'm,
are you coming to this board then?
She was asked.
No,
Mayor.
you
Oh,
said,
oh, oh.
you said that-
Retreat. She has the floor.
that this is something that the board needed to do. Why does the board need to change this up? Why do we have to approve this thing for you? Why can't you just go with the city and do it? Why can't you get your own actuarial report? The city get their own.
Yeah.
Why does the board have to approve this? Why can't you just go and do it on your own? Why can't the city just go do it
well, I
on their
would
own?
prefer to use the actuary that you guys have always been using
Okay.
to come up with that value, since they're the ones that are gonna be able to do it the most efficiently.
Mhm.
One of the questions that is going to be asked by the IRS on the application is why there is a surplus. The only way to get the surplus out is to show that there was a actuarial computation error. And it's not error in the common sense where the actuary made a mistake, it's just actuarial assumptions, as you know, are predictions. Nobody can predict the future, and the actuary may have said it was 7% here, and it turns out it was 9, we had a return of 9%, vice versa. The IRS is going to ask to see what the assumptions were, because they only let out if it was based on what they consider an error based on reasonable assumptions. So they're gonna ask us what the assumptions we used were. We're gonna show them what they were, but it is quite possible, and again, I can't predict what the IRS is gonna do, and this is an issue of, to our knowledge, first impression. They may say that a city that is coming out of receivership and has a defined benefit plan with surplus, why are you trying to question, take away from the pensioners? And that's not what we're trying to do, and we just think that it's possible they're gonna ask for a more conservative approach, and we wanna be prepared for that.
Okay, if they ask for a more conservative approach, why would we go from 7 to 3.5?
I'm offering you a range.
What are the other ranges then? Why? That is a drastic range as far as I'm concerned.
Well, as you know, interest rates are going down. We are predicting a recession. I mean, we cannot predict the future. My job is to make sure that the city is covered and that we are not in a lawsuit decades from now.
It's not about being in a lawsuit.
Well, it is.
With
It
you
is.
going down that low, you wanna make sure that the city does not have to pay into this.
That has nothing to do with that.
That's-
The
that's
request,
what I- Okay, I'm done.
Let me perhaps give you a perspective that perhaps, from a trustee's perspective. We are the ones and the only ones that set the assumptions for this board. We don't take that lightly, nor do we take it lightly that it is our responsibility to make sure that all the retirees and their beneficiaries, until they die, have a pension. That is our responsibility. We're the only one can set those numbers. So the real question becomes whether this board allows anyone outside of this board to set assumptions. That's the real question. And the board at our last meeting voted primarily that this is not something that we want to relinquish. I liken it to the mayor's responsibility to submit a budget to the city council. She is the only one that can do that. The city council is the only one that can approve a budget unless some court does it, okay? that's the way we feel. Why would we then relinquish our responsibility to set the numbers so that someone else can then come in and use their numbers? Let me ask you this question, Samantha. Does the city have its own actuary?
Not that I'm aware of that the GERS board has been, in terms of for the retirement assets.
I said, that's not what I asked you. My question to you is, does the city have its own actuary?
I would assume so. I do not know the
Well,
answer
I would
to
think
that.
that, I'm not, I'll just help you out, since you perhaps don't know. Yes, they do have their own actuary.
Okay.
The city is required annually through their actuary to also do their books. My question to you, if you have your own actuary, why don't you use your own actuary and you put your own assumptions to it, and I'm certain that will be acceptable. But this board here has taken the position that we're not gonna relinquish that authority.
May I speak?
Yes, you may.
Okay, so I think that there is a huge misconception about what we are trying to do. I'm not trying to take over the board's responsibility. I'm not trying to take over what assumptions the board utilizes. All I was asking was for some additional information just to evaluate and we heard this is an extremely complicated transaction. I don't want it to get held up once we actually do the filings and get it moving. If I didn't ask for a supplemental evaluation, and again, this board does not have to use it. I'm just looking for information. But if I didn't ask for it, and then we get to the IRS and they start questioning it, I'm pretty sure you guys would be here saying, well, why, if we thought it was an issue, why didn't we bring it up, 5 months ago? So, I mean, I'm
But my
just
question
getting
to
back
you though,
information.
Samantha,
Yes.
my question to you, and you haven't answered it yet. You have your own actuary. Why do you then feel it necessary to use an actuary that would then change our numbers? Why don't you use your own?
I think you already answered.
Actuary.
You can answer it again if you
Ms.
want.
Mayor,
Okay.
you're a trustee,
She
you're
works
not,
for
you
me.
don't,
She works for the city, and she's
Well,
here not
this-
to be paraded,
but-
she's here to provide information.
you're
So
the one that brought her
she's
here, right?
No, you've asked me.
The
And
city
you-
council's
I've-
demand
I've
yesterday.
asked you
Asked her for
questions.
3 months to bring her here.
Okay.
So
but-
don't
but
parade her,
you-
let her
but you-
answer the question.
Already, I'm asking for the question.
Okay.
I asked the question, why is it that you
The
don't
question
use your
was
own?
asked and answered before, if
Okay,
you want it answered again,
would
you
you,
can, but do not parade her. Do not parade her.
You're the one that
Go
asked
ahead
her
and
to come
repeat the
here,
question.
Mayor.
Go ahead and repeat the question.
Are you here at the request of the mayor?
I'm here ultimately at the request of the mayor, but
Okay.
city council demanded it yesterday. I mean, they flat out said, why have you not shown up at the GERS board morning?
Louise
So
was
we're
my
on
only
there and
question
said
to
how
you
many
is-
times she's been asked to come. She went here and said every
She-
month she's been asked
she-
to come.
But you still haven't answered my question.
missed.
Why is it that you
And you
can't
did too.
use the city's actuary? Why do you feel it necessary to come and use an actuary that is hired by this board?
There is nothing saying that we cannot use the city's actuary, but the board's, the plan's actuary has all the information, has all the historical data. I do believe that it's the more efficient approach.
Yes.
Well, all this historical data is public knowledge,
Information.
correct, public information. Given information, let the city do it themselves.
I guess I'm not understanding why why you feel it necessary to usurp the responsibility of this board.
I'm not trying to usurp the responsibilities of this
Yeah,
board.
go ahead,
All
so
due
Mr.
respect.
Roberts.
And maybe, I'm just trying to clarify, I mean, and maybe for all of us, and maybe this is a question for Cynthia as well. Does the board approving something like this, and let's say it's not three, let's say it's 3.5 and 4.5 and 5% return on investment, or ROI. Does that in any way, does having the board, the GERS board actuary, does having them do this study negatively impact the board or the trustees in any way?
Yes, I say this, just as I used the example of the mayor having the responsibility of submitting the budget. Do you think that the mayor would allow this board to come in and submit a budget to the city council? Or do you feel that the city council would allow this board to approve the city budget?
Well, I'm thinking of it in a different way. Does it affect the plan in any way? Or, I mean, basically, we're being asked for information. And
No,
that's why I guess, the way I see it, I'm looking at it is we're being asked for information to provide it because our actuary is actually the expert on this. They are the person that knows. And is there any blowback to the board or the system if we were to provide this information? Again, it's information, it's like asking our finance director. I'm asking
that question.
basically our attorney, the city's attorney for this.
Okay.
Is there any blowback to
Can
either,
anyone answer
in
that
any way?
question?
That you can think of? I don't, it's kind of a broad question.
Actually, I would like to address this, if I may. I watched the council meeting last night, and I was actually pleased when the mayor talked about the innovativeness of this settlement. I was pleased because I'm the one that came up with the idea. As you guys know, the retirees sued the city for a return of their health care. I was asked to attend some of the early mediation sessions, and the city's proposal to resolve this lawsuit through the mayor's office was to terminate the GERS plan and to send the assets to MERS to start up a new pension plan and a new VIVA. And the retirees were adamantly against that proposal. So I suggested to the mediator, why don't we explore the idea of, rather than terminating the plan and sending the money to the state, to MERS, why don't we look at terminating the plan and starting up another locally controlled retirement system and VIVA? And all of the parties appeared to like that idea. And as a result, Eugene Dreiker, the mediator, requested that I research it. And I did an extensive amount of research on this. I laid out the blueprint. I showed you how to amend the plans. I recommended IRS approval. Nowhere in all the research that I did was there any requirement that certain assumptions be used. Using a 3.5% assumption rate based on what our actuary said, she was at our June meeting, I'm not sure, Mayor, if you were here, but our actuary indicated that if you use 3.5%, the funding level is going to be 122%. It usurps the whole settlement. And my suggestion would be, rather than using an interest rate that completely undermines the settlement, that I would present it to the IRS and show the IRS how these assumptions are reasonable, that the actuary has approved the assumptions. The investment consultants have approved the assumptions. The assumptions are reasonably used by other public plans, many other public plans. I don't know of a public plan that has a 3.5% interest rate. And I think the best way to show the IRS, or to demonstrate to the IRS that these assumptions are reasonable, is looking at the actual history of this plan and the fact that for the past 30 years they have always exceeded, on average, greatly exceeded that assumed rate of return. So I don't understand how you go to the IRS and you show them two sets of assumptions or a range and have the IRS pick the assumption to determine the amount of money that's going to be used. I would first go to the IRS, and I have dealt with the IRS for 25 years. I have terminated plans. I have not done this. This was an innovative, novel approach, 100%. But I would start with that. If for some reason I couldn't convince the IRS that these were reasonable assumptions, then maybe you have to go back. But I've never had the IRS shut the door on trying to negotiate a determination letter because you needed additional information. They've always, they issue extensions. At that point, you can say, look, the IRS isn't buying the 7% for these reasons. We need to lower the assumed rate of return. That would be my suggestion, based on my research.
Thank you.
The bottom line that this board has to understand is, first of all, our primary responsibility is not to provide health care for retirees. Our responsibility is to guarantee that our membership and their beneficiaries have pensions for the rest of their life. If in fact there's a lawsuit that's involving the city and CEPRA or anyone else, we should not be involved in that in any way. You still have the floor, and Mayor, you're next.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Billings, for that history. I want.
No. You're not running the meeting. Mr. Ballard, you have the floor. You're
So,
next.
and a quick question for you, Ms. Lopez, and forgive me if you've already answered this, but is there anything required in our submittal to the IRS today that says we have to submit additional, an additional actuarial study? Can we just submit with the information we have based on our current actuarial studies and then see where it goes? I think, I've dealt with not really the IRS necessarily, but the Department of Energy and other federal government agencies, and I find that providing more information than what they actually ask for can be a problem.
So, to answer your question first, yes, we can submit without a supplemental analysis. It's not necessarily that we would be submitting the 3.5% or the 7.5%. It's literally to get the information. And I also want to point out, in your own actuarial report, the actuary says, "It is important to note that the funding status measurement presented in this report is inappropriate for assessing the sufficiency of plan assets to cover the estimated cost of settling the plan benefit obligations and the need or amount of future employer contributions." I mean, it specifically says in here that the report is not for that purpose. And I'm not saying that we need a report that is for that purpose at this point, but I'm flat out saying your own actuary is saying that this is not sufficient to go for when you're actually settling the assets.
Okay, Mayor, you have the floor now.
That's a good point. So yes, Ms. Billings did give some history on this, and just to accentuate that as well. Yes, in the 4.5 years it took to negotiate this and mediate this, and we had 2 different mediators over a good period of time, there were a number of different modalities raised to be able to settle this. Some of you remember, because this board was very much involved, and Ms. Billings at that time had suggested the 425 transfer, and we spent over a year with a lot of research being done on that 425 transfer, only to find that that didn't work. So in trying to reach a solution for this, there were a number of different suggestions, a number of different people were party to this. We come up with something that works well and meets the needs of our particular plan, guarantees the pension funds stay at a certain level. We want to maximize those, and that's the point of doing this particular kind of settlement for the retirees, and also restores health care. There's so many communities around us that haven't been able to do it to the full effect that we're able to do with this. Now, I'm not a pension specialist, and I don't think anybody around this table is, except for Ms. Billings done, but this is who we have retained to do that. She's done all the research, she's done all of the documentation that's necessary for this particular plan. I want to ask you the last question. You have given us, asked the city to produce all these documents, which you have researched, and I've shown them here for everybody because you've seen this, over the last number of months. Now, is the supplemental actuarial analysis the only document left that you would like to have to complete your research?
Yes, because once we have that, then
We have that. We presented it
Not the
to
one she
the,
asked for.
well, the thing about it, here's the question.
Can I finish mine, because you interrupted me?
Well,
You interrupted me, may I
please,
finish? I think I had the floor.
Please do, but would
I think I had the
you
floor,
make it
please.
germane
I am
to
making
us
germane.
and the supplemental, not
Yeah,
all that
I
other
continue.
stuff? Yes.
Thank you for the courtesy of having the floor. So I did substantiate that this is the last document that she's asking this board. For 3 months, you've been holding this up, waiting to talk to her. I have brought her here.
No.
Wait a minute. I
You
brought
can't
her
make statements
here.
like that, that's
I
not true.
brought her
Mayor.
here to talk to you per your request, okay? Per your request to me that not only provide answers, but actually have her here in person, so she's here today. So this is the last thing, the question I would ask this board is, why would you not want to cooperate?
It's
Now, why
not,
would you not
it's
want to
not,
do this?
because this is not our responsibility. Our responsibility is not to get
All right.
between a lawsuit between the city and any other organization. I've said this once and I'll continue to say it, our responsibility
Yes.
is to set realistic assumptions. And if you remember correctly, we had an assumption originally of 7.5%. To be conservative,
Right.
we changed it from 7.5% to 7%, which is pretty much the same assumption that everybody in the country
Well,
is
may
using.
I interject for one thing, because in the state of Michigan, there's predominantly one actuary that's doing all of the assumptions, for all the municipalities. So the fact that multiple municipalities in the area have the same assumptions, and that's not to say the assumption's wrong, but the fact that they have the same assumptions is not shocking because they use the same actuaries.
Well, you know, perhaps you don't have as much experience and knowledge as of us as trustees. We have an opportunity through educational seminars and so forth to meet actually with other trustees, administrators from other systems. Not only do we have met folks that have 7.5%, 8%, even up to 9%. But no one have we ran across that uses an assumption rate of 3.5%. And here's the question, it gets back down to it. All of this stuff means nothing. The question that this board has to answer is whether we will allow anyone else to change our assumption. That's the question.
And sir, I'm not trying to do that, I'm
I'm
not trying to
not-
question the
If- if
actuary's
in
assumptions,
fact
I'm
you-
just looking for information.
But if you're asking us to submit assumptions, anything other than the assumptions that we have already adopted for this board, you're asking us to change the assumption.
No.
And we're saying to
Not
you that by our vote last week, and we're gonna vote on a motion today, we don't want to anyone else to set the assumption for this board except for the board.
May I?
Yes, you may.
Two things. And I see the confusion here, is that you're arguing a non-issue. She's told you over and over again that what she puts in an IRS application are a number of things. It does not infringe upon this board to set any assumptions by which this board operates. So to keep arguing that, this is infringing upon your assumptions is a non-issue. Because she
Well,
told you over and over again it doesn't. Now, let my
it's
last
not
thing.
a
My last
non-issue
thing.
to you.
So the question is whether this board is going to cooperate with the process to get the settlement agreement terms filled so we can get this to the IRS. That's the question on the board right now. Do we want to cooperate with this as a board? So at that, I will leave it and the vote will speak for itself.
Billy, you have something to
Yes,
say?
I just came from the makers, and one of the things the actuary, in one of the meetings, it says, if you change the percentage, either up or down, you change the valuation. So, my vote is going to be for remaining consistent with what we already have. And let's go to the IRS with the current actuary report we have. If the IRS wants answers, let them ask.
And we have a resolution that we're gonna present to the board today that will clarify this. Anybody that wants to have an actuarial study, and that's optional, we always do that. But anyone that wishes to do an actuarial study with our actuary, they're gonna have to use our assumptions, period.
Yeah, I heard you. I would like to make a motion at this time. I would like to move that this board has heard the answers of Ms. Papas, and that we vote to approve ask to our actuaries that they complete the supplemental actuarial evaluation as requested by the city attorney who has been retained to file the application with the IRS. And that is what I move.
Mr. Chairman, you stated, I'm looking at this, you say there's a policy too that we're looking at City of Pontiac General Employees Retirement Policy Resolution 14-036, supplemental actual analysis approval, and that's the one that you would like for this board to be
To consider, yes.
considering.
And this comes with the recommendation from the finance committee on yesterday. And that was one, I understand you didn't get a second.
Why did I have, I'm not sure if I got a second or not.
Well, you didn't.
Well, you didn't get a second, so that
Well,
dies.
I don't have any-
I have
second.
I would change that motion, because based on what Ms. Billings Dunn mentioned, I think the 3.5 is kind of subverting the process. It's creating, I will not second that motion, not at 3.5%.
Okay, so that motion died. We're gonna continue on with our agenda. Is there any other questions for Mrs. Kopak? Or do you have any additional comments that you would like to make to the board, Ms. Kopak?
No, I think that I've answered everything that you've asked, and if you want to discuss a different interest rate, it's certainly something that we can discuss. Miller Canfield's recommendation was 3.5%, but we are more than willing to entertain other suggestions.
Okay, you understand that this board is not a party to the lawsuit, right?
Yes, I think I've made that very clear.
Okay, well,
I don't know how else to say that, I'm just looking for information.
I just want you I want everybody to know that.
You've made yourself
Okay.
perfectly clear,
Okay,
and
so we're not in,
board's
we
overall
have
consensus.
nothing to do with this lawsuit. We're here to provide pensions for our membership and the beneficiaries until they die.
And that's what I'm also trying to help accomplish.
But
Not step on your toes, just make sure
but
that
you,
that also happens.
you and the city have your lawsuit against the city. You already have, I thought you had a tentative agreement, okay? And it had nothing to do with us or these assumptions. Now all of a sudden we're
Well,
being pulled into
May I
it.
interject for 1 second, because the settlement agreement actually does specifically say that both the city and the retiree class have to agree to the assumptions before the assets are transferred.
Well, that is still your business. That's not us. That's not us.
No, but I'm
It doesn't
just
say
telling
anything
you.
about this board.
It says nothing about this board, but it still talks about the assumptions that are gonna be used to move the assets.
Between you and CEQA, right?
Correct.
Okay, not us. And what we're saying at this point, as far as we're concerned, and we're going around and around and around, and we're gonna hopefully end this, because this resolution is also on our agenda now. It will be before us, under new business, is that where it's at? We have other business to take care of, and if there's no further questions or comments, yes?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank you, Samantha, for coming today. I know this probably can't be easy, and nobody's trying to beat you up, but please understand our position here. And as you stated, these are just various rates, and when you submit the 7%, if that doesn't work, then go 6.54 and see what happens from there. But the 3.5% is just not seem feasible to us right now.
My question is, where did 3.5% come from?
Thank you.
Just
I mean,
a sec.
from where? Pull it out the atmosphere?
I guess. Where did the 3.5% come from?
We were looking for a range, flat and simple, because assumptions, actuarial valuations are assumptions. So we just wanted a range. This is similar to what PBGC, which I know you guys are not a party to, but what they're doing for annuities, and it's
What is
That's the guarantee that the
pension
that the
guarantee
government
when
makes. I know.
private sector employers terminate.
Right.
It is,
This
but
public.
I previously just said that it was not applicable directly, but that we were just looking for a range, we're just looking for information. We're trying to all be on the same team here, guys.
Are you open for suggestions? You have your own actuary, you have any information that you need to do your own actuarial studies, is available to you. So any kind of numbers or assumptions, you've got Rodwin, is it, or what is the?
Nyhart.
Huh?
Raymond or
Nyhart.
Nyhart is your actuary. They're an acceptable firm. It's acceptable to the industry. So if you actually wanted to do your own actuarial study using whatever assumptions you want, you have that capability. And I'm sure that if that's what you're trying to do, the IRS would accept it, or anybody else, but we don't want to be in the middle of that, okay? And we don't want anyone else to think that they can come to this board and set whatever assumptions they want, because we have done our fiduciary duty by setting these assumptions. So thank you for coming too, okay?
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move on. So, next on the agenda is the consent agenda. Been moved and supported. Any questions, comments, concerns as it relates to the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? Ayes have it, and so ordered. We'll now move on to agenda item number 5, which is consultants.
Okay, Cashel?
Yes,
What's
what's
that?
in the new
It's
business?
in the new business? Okay, fine, some communications. So, we'll talk just briefly today, just about the S allocation and the economy. So, I would turn your attention though to one sheet that we have here, and it's one of our reallocation sheets. Do you know where it is in their packet?
It should be the second sheet in your package. Exactly, yes.
Yep, so I'll just use that as
Second
reference.
sheet in your package,
The handout?
correct.
Yeah,
Does it have
handout.
green lines?
It's got some green lines, it's got $10 million on the column G, column K. So, just briefly, we should talk about the economy and the how it relates to the S allocation and what you all have done historically. It's in the packet, in that handout, yeah. Yeah, I think that's it right there. Yep. So, there's been a lot of talk about recession. The attorney just mentioned it. What we're seeing out there in the economy and how we have adjusted our portfolio over time. So over time, over the past couple of years, we have been adjusting our portfolio, taking the risk out of the portfolio. About a year and a half ago, we had over 70% in equities. Now equities is an asset class that in recession loses roughly 20 to 30%. We've been pulling assets out of that and putting it into real estate. We're now almost fully allocated to real estate, about 10% allocation, which has a lot less cyclicality to it in downturns. What we've also done in our fixed income allocation is we've cleaned that up a lot. We've got rid of anything that's below investment grade. So below investment grade is considered high yield or junk bonds. Those typically have cyclicality to it as well. So when equities are down, high yield junk bonds are down. We don't have that anymore in our fixed income. So we've cleaned up our fixed income allocation. If you look at the bottom, domestic fixed income, we brought that back to target, actually slightly below target with cash flows we'll talk about today. So historically speaking, about a year ago, our fixed income was about 18%. We're now at 25, 26% of fixed income. So we've made moves in the allocation to get a little more defensive as we've seen some cross currents in the economy. Now, what are we seeing in the economy and some of our cross currents? Now, historically, I'm an optimist. I've always been an optimist. I'm always bullish. It's just my personality. But lately, I've been waffling a little bit. We're seeing some flashing yellow lights here. And this is an economy that can go up or down at this point in time, depending on certain things happening that we can't control or predict. So what do I mean by that? So as it stands now, the global economy is slowing down a little bit. We're seeing Europe entering a mild recession, some economies, Germany and whatnot. China is slowing down a little bit as well. The only bastion of growth globally is the US. And really what's helping us out is our consumer. The industrial manufacturing base here, it's relatively small in terms of GDP, has slowed down a little bit. We're seeing a little bit of uptick now, but it has slowed a little bit. The yield curve, we talked about yield curve inversion as a harbinger of future recessions. That inverted a little bit again this past quarter. So we're seeing some signs of weakening here. So this is a market that could be up or down 20%, depending on, say, a tweet or what happens with China. And that really seems to be what's happening at this point. The market is sort of sitting on its hands, trying to read the tea leaves, trying to listen to what's going to happen there. Because frankly, what's propping up the market right now is the consumer. The consumer is fickle. We as consumers can slow down our spending depending on our emotions. And so that's the main concern here. If we as consumers start feeling recession is coming, we can will ourselves into a recession. The economic data right now does not point to that. The economy is still growing. GDP was up 1.9% in the second quarter. Third quarter, I mean, in the second quarter, third quarter predictions are still looking at 1.9 to 2.24, depending on what forecast you're looking at, whether it's the Atlanta GDP Now or the New York Fed nowcasting. So growth is still there in the U.S. There's no imminent signs of recession. Employment is still strong, but there's little cracks here and there. So we have moved our allocation accordingly. I'll pause there if anybody has any questions on the economy, our thoughts, markets, allocation.
Thing that I'm glad for is the fact that we've already, prepared ourselves for if there's a recession. Recession, we're in good shape.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're in better shape than where we were.
Right. Which is a good thing.
Yes.
All right.
And then in terms of performance reporting, and we'll go into more detail tomorrow. We have the retreat tomorrow. We have 45 minutes, plenty of time to go through the book and talk about our manager's returns as well.
All right. Any further questions on this particular topic?
Great. So that's all I had in terms of our prepared remarks. We have a few things under new business in terms of cash flows and movement of money. I'll wait till that comes up.
All righty, so then we'll continue on with the agenda. And next, we will go to reports. Committee reports, Personnel and Finance Committee both met. You wanna go over those things?
So Personnel Committee met, both committees reviewed the 2020 proposed expense budget and are recommending that for approval. That is an item under unfinished business.
Can't hear you, Jennifer.
I'm sorry. Both committees are recommending that we would approve the 2020 proposed expense budget, unfinished business item. The Personnel Committee discussed implementing a way to correspond mass communications with the members via emails. And so they tasked the staff with doing a cost-benefit analysis of what it would cost us to send certain communications, like the $400 notice. What would it cost us to send that via email versus by regular mail? We don't have the email capabilities right now, but we're going to research that for the committee and provide them with the information. The committee heard a verbal, both committees heard a verbal update on the member who is going through the disability reexamination process. His doctor has suggested a third doctor, and we're awaiting confirmation from our doctor that that third doctor is acceptable. Both committees reviewed the monthly disability annual procedures report. The Personnel Committee did review the annual employee evaluations, and they have requested additional information. And that was it for the Personnel Committee. The Finance Committee reviewed the information regarding CISR and the Emerging Manager Program. That is a new business item. They are proposing to increase the allocation, the target allocation, to match the current allocation, which is approximately $70 million under the Emerging Manager Program, which we recently changed to all cap. And they approved the investment guidelines and fee agreement that are in your agenda. They reviewed all the correspondence from the managers. They are recommending the new business item that we do put Piedmont Capital on watch. They had a senior portfolio manager change, and it's just customary that in that type of situation, we would put the manager on watch for 2 quarters. They received a verbal update on the fiduciary liability, insurance, vendor search. They began to review the funding policy overview and draft, and they do intend to be able to make recommendations on that after the next committee meeting. And the committee directed that the consultant come up with a proxy voting education session to get trustees familiar with the proxy voting process and how we can be more involved in that process. And they are recommending the update to the supplemental actuarial analysis policy. They are recommending that to the board for approval. And that was it for the personnel committee. I'm sorry, for finance committee.
Okay. Now we move to, are there any questions on the committee reports? Hearing none, we'll move to the trustees. Does any trustee have anything to bring to the board at this point?
I just wanted to say that if you want a copy of any evaluation, all you have to do is request it to Deborah, and it is available. It will not be distributed to the, if you're not on the committee doing the evaluation, you won't be given a copy of it. If you want a copy, ask Deborah, and she will distribute it to you.
I would like a copy.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything that comes before this board, if a trustee wishes to have a copy of it, it is available to you. So, but anyway, we'll move on to then, if there's no further comments from any trustee, we'll move on to the chairman's report. I would only just remind everyone that we do have our manager review, I guess it's biannual or semi-annual, a manager review that will be conducted tomorrow morning, beginning at 8 o'clock. And we'll be going most of the day, so we would encourage you, if at all possible, to be there. The other thing that I would want to, perhaps sometime next year at the convention, I indicated that I would kind of drop the idea of having a board retreat. I'm back on it again, hopefully because we have new members that, they'll see the necessity of us kind of removing ourselves, coming together. Things that I'm thinking that we should be looking at is if nothing else, a funding policy and a strategic plan, developing a strategic plan for our organization. I would like for you to consider that in sometime, maybe early next year, sometime during the first quarter, that if we decided that is worthwhile for us, that we seriously consider doing that. Outside of that, that's all I have. And so we'll just move on to the executive director's report.
So with respect to the disability annual procedures report, we have one member who is still scheduled to be reexamined on October 17th. There are no assets currently in transition. And there is an email from NAPERS that they sent out regarding these fraudulent emails. I gave you an example of one that we had actually received that tried to spoof the mayor's email, and it was just more for your information. We have reached out to Northern Trust and ADP, our service providers, to get copies of their cybersecurity, their policy on cybersecurity, as well as their insurance limits, as was recommended. And the annual notices regarding continuation of the $400 was mailed on September 3rd. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Then we'll move on to unfinished business. I think this is probably the second month that we've had a budget before us. It came before the Personnel Committee, Personnel and Administrative Committee, and it also came before the Finance Committee. Both committees recommended that we submit this to the board and that it be approved. So it is before us now, and a motion is in order to approve, but if there's questions or comments or concerns, then this is the time to do it. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the
It's
budget.
been moved.
We're talking about this.
The budget, 2020 budget.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's right behind,
Support.
behind,
Here,
unfinished business.
here.
We we have two supports.
Oh, never mind, I'm sorry. Who supported?
Mr. Allen moved it and Mr. Walker supported it. And it was also supported by. Are there any questions on the 2020 budget?
I have one. Deborah, you said this morning that there was a change that was made by the finance committee. Where, and is it
To
on
the budget?
Is it on?
No, there
One
was
that
not
we-
a change made to the 2020 budget. I requested that we add an additional item under the unfinished business to amend the 2019 budget
Okay.
for that.
So would we want to amend that first then, the next 2019 budget?
No, you can proceed with the approval of the
Okay, so
2020.
we have it before. Is there any further questions, comments, or concerns on the 2020 budget? I remind you that this is only a plan, and, you know, it's the best, guess or plan that we have at this current time. If we need to amend it at some point in time, we have the ability to do so. So it's probably before us. If there's no further questions or concerns, would you call the roll?
Ballot,
Yes.
Giddings,
Yes.
Mariani,
Yeah.
Moore,
Yes.
Swazer,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
D. Waterman,
Yes.
P. Waterman,
Yes.
White.
Yes.
Now, you said we need to amend the 2019
Correct.
budget. Could you give us more details on
Sure.
that?
So the 2019 budget, as prior budgets were adopted, was adopted without including the supplemental payment that gets paid from September through December. The budget is passed a year in advance, and that approval doesn't happen until the following year. So we didn't previously budget for those 4 months of payments. This amendment would add $2 million to the 2019 budget to account for the $400 payment that will be paid for September through December, and we'll bring it in line with the 2018 actual payroll.
Moved and supported. Any further questions, comments, or concerns? This also came with the recommendation of the Finance Committee, is that correct?
That is
The
correct, sir.
Finance Committee recommended that rather than to leave those 4 months out, to add those 4 months so it would accurately reflect the action for the next fiscal year. Is there any further questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, and so ordered. We'll move on to unfinished business.
That was,
Well, that's all the unfinished business, right? So we'll go to new business. And, you have the floor.
okay, so in your handouts, there is another sheet that looks just like the rebalancing sheet, but it has, $3.7 million in column J, and right in front of that is a spreadsheet with 3 boxes across the top, and right in front of that is a resolution. So the last 3 pages, I believe.
Could you, hold, that's it, that's in the.
In the
packet?
handouts. So it's a resolution followed by a spreadsheet with 3 boxes.
Right here.
I believe it's the last 3 pages.
Okay.
And then another rebalancing spreadsheet, but in column J, there's $3.7 million.
Yeah, sorry they all look the same, normally we only use one of these sheets. But just the way it came about with the adjustments for the emerging manager, we have a couple of sheets here. And so that's why the packet, that's why I was pulling back this extra sheet to try to make life a little
So
easier.
which sheet should we have before the
Okay,
this minute?
so there is a resolution, and it has some,
This one here, right?
yes, the resolution.
This was handout, I think this is it,
Yeah, there's all the handout, yep, it's in that pocket.
Need one is stapled,
yeah. Take it all in there. Take them all out.
3.7, and then
And then there's
Okay, everybody got it? All right.
the
go right
spreadsheet
ahead.
with 3 boxes, okay.
And the one with the 3 boxes is the colorful one here, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's in your handout, man.
Yeah, I know, I got 2 of the same thing.
That
Okay, I got it.
Yeah, remove the staple one.
All right, I think we're all here.
All right, so just as a reminder, we had made changes to the Emerging Manager Program. Initially, we were going to graduate the 2 Michigan-based managers and convert the program from large cap to all cap. Everything went out without a hitch except the Sizer account. We ended up retaining Sizer within the Emerging Manager Program. However, there were questions that had to come back to the committee. It had to do with their investment guidelines, with the new fee structure, but also with the amount that would be allocated, because we had said we would allocate 60 million, but retaining Sizer in that portfolio meant that we actually have $70 million in our emerging manager program. The 3-box spreadsheet, this is from Addix. Addix is the manager of managers. They're over all of the emerging managers, and they came back with 3 scenarios. We could have left it as is, where there were 4 emerging managers and a separate portfolio with just 1 Michigan-based manager. The second one is what the committee is actually recommending, where we have 1 emerging manager program, all the managers are included, and we're going to increase the allocation to mirror what the current allocation is, which is about 70 million. And they also provided the third example where we would have pared it back to 60 million. Again, the committee is recommending that we would allocate $70 million to the emerging manager program to reflect the current allocation. And we're also going to amend the IPS, and that's the DAHAB spreadsheet. The one with the $3.7 million in column J.
Because this one is the green for the adjustment.
Okay. Is that the one that everyone has?
This is the
Single
staple
sheet,
one.
green.
Yeah.
Between the single sheet.
Yes, it's a single sheet.
Yeah, but I think the one in the packet is
They have 2. They have 2 spreadsheets.
yeah. I
One
think that
stapled
one's
and
right.
one single.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you go to the second page of the 2-pager, there you go.
Is that the one with this, like this one here?
Little
Yes.
green box in it.
With the green box on it?
Yeah.
It's a 2-pager in your handout.
But this is it right here, right?
Yeah, okay,
So
that's it.
single, some of you have it as a
That's
single
close
sheet, and
enough.
some of you have it as a second sheet that's stapled.
So with
Same
a
thing.
green arrow or?
Yeah,
Green arrow.
green box, yeah.
Green box?
Green box
Green
on column
box,
H.
green arrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the green box is showing the adjustment to the asset allocation. So essentially, the target allocation for all cap will go from 12% to 14% to accommodate the size of assets going back into all cap. And to accommodate that, we had to adjust the large cap down a percentage point. To look at column G and H. So all cap goes from 12 to 14%, large cap goes from 11 to 10, and mid cap goes from 16 to 15. So we essentially just reallocated some of the targets. so going forward, we recommend, that the target allocation for all cap be 14%, which encompasses the emerging manager program.
And I'd like to stop there to see if any, because I know the finance committee received this, but I'd like to give everyone else an opportunity to ask questions about the reallocation. It's not a big adjustment, but it is that we will be amending the IPS for this. Okay.
Everybody clear? Okay.
Okay, and so the committee is also recommending that the board would approve the investment guidelines and the fee structure. So for the all-cap portfolio, the system will pay 55 basis points instead of the 50 we're paying the large cap.
Say that again, please.
For the large, all-cap portfolio, the system will pay 55 basis points. For the large cap portfolio, we were paying 50 basis points.
Any questions? So the official actions that you're asking us to do is to approve
So that's the resolution you have
the red with the red.
with the red.
This one here with the red, all the red, right here, this.
Yes, sir.
All right.
So the board would approve the consultant's recommendation to allocate $70 million to the emerging manager program to reflect the current allocation and to amend the IPS to reflect the following adjustments to domestic equity. All cap would go from 12 to 14%, large cap would go from 11 to 10%, mid cap would go from 16 to 50%. And further resolve that the board would approve the amended Appendix A, which are the investment guidelines, and the second revision to Appendix B, which is the fee schedule, and further resolve that the board would authorize the chairman's signature, on all required documents, because we're going to have a new investment agreement and the transition management agreement with Northern Trust, that you would authorize the signature on all the necessary documents.
So is there a mover? Move. And support?
Support.
And support.
Support.
Okay, we have two support. Is there any further questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none? All in favor? Opposed? Ayes have it, and so ordered. Okay, what's next?
Sir, item B was, that resolution was actually incorporated as part of the resolution for Sizer, or for the addicts that you just passed.
Move. No, we didn't, that was a part of it.
So it's two.
There's two, but I actually incorporated
All
it because
in-
it's one.
All into one. Okay, so where are we now
So-
in terms of the agenda?
Mr. Moore, if you would like, we could review the proposed changes to the supplemental actuarial analysis policy, which was a
Okay.
handout.
That would be this document right here. Okay. And let me give a backdrop on that. I think we've had a lot of backdrop already. But the reason that this resolution is being proposed is that we want to make it clear through our actuarial policy that we want to make sure that anyone that needs to use our actuary has the right to do so, but they must use the board's assumptions, the assumptions that are adopted by the board. And that's what, in actuality, that's what this does. We don't want anyone in the future to have any doubt that this board believes that we've set fair assumptions, and if they want to use our actuary, that they need to use the assumptions that have been adopted by this board. That's simply what this does. Good, let me get it, see if we can get it before us first, then you'll be the first one to ask. Is there someone that would move this?
I move it.
Been moved and seconded, that's Swayzer and Walker. Okay, we have a proper motion before us. Mayor, you have the floor.
So in light of the discussion we had this morning and trying to find a way this board can cooperate with the settlement that we need to get, that's what my first choice would be, to have this board cooperate in that. If not, then, we have to go another way. But, in lieu of the retirees that we serve, it would be nice if this board would be tactically a part of what the settlement would bring them their health care benefits again. So, if the assumption, that the board usually makes one assumption, one rate. So that means if in a study, such as this is what Ms. Topaz is saying she wants to send to the IRS, is there only then one assumption? She can't do a range at any rate? If you don't like the 3.5, that means she can't do it at 5 or 6, or whatever other range that might be acceptable. I'm just trying to ask the rhetorical question, because I'm trying to figure out, I'm problem solving. I'm just trying to figure out how to solve this problem.
I have a question to you.
But let him go.
Walker first and then Swayze.
You say if the board would cooperate, where has the board not cooperated?
Well, you've been asked, there's a request from the city that we generally get all the actual evaluations that we need from this board. This board has generally consented to do that. One of the guys to do that. When we have, at various times, we've had to have actual evaluations. So we like to give good preference to this board when we ask to go through the board, okay? It doesn't affect any of the decisions or the votes you made, it's just something that we have been asked, required to do as the city.
But we've already done that.
At one set rate, okay? What they're saying, she's saying that she wants to take to the IRS as a part of this application is a range. That we look at the best worst scenario, which is what, as she, I think, I'm not a pension expert, but she read to us some of the things that they're considering, and there's a whole, pension, a section of this particular law firm that deals with just pension. So I can't explain to you as well as she can, but I think she did approach that. So what she's saying is she wants to be able to look at the best worst scenario. That's something that the IRS is going to ask for, all right? So, if not 3.5%, then some other percent, maybe that would work. But if you pass this, then it doesn't allow this board to cooperate in anything, any such study. And so rather than asking, doing what we usually do as a city to have that kind of communication with this board, it says, no, we won't do it.
I think that what this basically is saying is that we have the authority to set the assumptions, and anyone that wishes to use our actuary will have to use the assumptions that we set. That does not limit anyone else from using the information and the numbers to do whatever actuarial study they might want to do in addition to that.
Well, that was my question to you.
Yeah.
But passing this says that no, you cannot accept any other, anybody else who's doing any other kind of study, such as we need right here. You're not accepting a range because it's.
No,
if
this
the
is
board
saying that this
accept-
is not anything else is not binding on us.
Right. And
Yeah,
that-
and that's,
and that anyone that's gonna do a study has to
Exactly.
use our
exactly.
duly, selected, assumptions.
No, this says more than that. This says that there can be no study done. It only,
No.
the only study.
No, nobody ever said that to me.
That's
I
what
never
this
heard
says.
that.
That's what this says.
No, we
That's what it
can't.
says.
No, it's not.
Well,
This is
that's
basically
what-
saying if you're gonna do a study to use our actuary, that you'll use the assumption that this board has set.
And what is
we're
the assumption
only-
that this board has set?
on-
7%.
In turn.
So it says you can only
7%.
use 7%.
Current.
That's with our actuary.
Only use 7%, that's what this
That's
says.
our actuary.
So, but
What
she
is-
was asking, what the application she wants to do says, I want to look at, the IRS asked for best
Didn't
worst
ask for
scenario.
that.
Yes, well, are you a pension expert? How many
No,
IRS
but
applications have you made?
But I know, but you've admitted
So,
yourself that
this
the IRS
says-
didn't say
It says
that.
one, and so we can't do this study like that, that's saying we can't cooperate with that, so that's why this is coming up now, because, to block any attempt for her to come and ask for a range.
But
So-
the IRS didn't ask for anything.
No.
They didn't
That's
ask for a
correct.
number.
Oh.
They've never asked for a number, am I correct?
Right.
How do you know? Did you fill out the application?
Well, our attorney just said that earlier.
She's not doing the application for us.
I said based on my research,
Research.
I could find no requirement that
Have
specific
you done this
assumptions.
application? Are you doing
I
this
said,
application
excuse me, I
for
said
us?
based on my research.
Are you doing this application for us?
No.
Well, we're not
Okay.
gonna allow you to
Have you-
badger our
I don't
attorney
think
either,
you-
since we couldn't.
I think I
badger
can
the
answer the
attorney.
question
Okay.
my client just asked me.
That's correct, that's correct. Here's
I'm
the
your
question.
client too.
We have this resolution, before us, and not everybody, obviously will agree to it, but we wanna have some meaningful discussion, and then we would like to take a vote on it, either up or down. Is there any further questions or comments as it relates to this? Yes, Mr. Ballard.
Reading this and reading it very quickly, I think it does limit us in the fact that if we, let's say, this were to go to the IRS and the IRS came back and said, hey, could you please do this? This would kind of limit us, and I think we could do, as a board, we could vote on a case-by-case basis in the future what we want to do. I don't know that we have to have an actual policy. I could be wrong though.
It could be amended.
It could be, right, that's true.
And I would think, nobody here wishes to violate the law. And if this was something that a court of law would require of us, a regulatory agency like the IRS, that's a whole different set of circumstances that we would then have to consider. I think this resolution covers anyone that just wants to come in and for whatever reason, to settle a lawsuit or whatever else they might, that they're gonna use our actuary, and we're gonna use their assumptions. That's what this covers.
But
Yeah.
I'm looking at it as if the IRS were to come back to us and say, hey, please do a study at 5%, do an actuarial analysis, then we already have a policy, a resolution that states we don't do that.
Right, I think,
I would say that what this resolution would require is that the board approve it. That's all. So if the IRS came back and said, we really want to see a 5% number, it has to come back to this
We have to
board,
approve it.
based on your policy to approve it. And even having said that, if the IRS were to request a 5% and the city were to have their own actuarial valuation done showing 5%, okay, we could take issue, say, IRS, those aren't our assumptions, and the IRS is gonna say, well, wait, we asked for 5%, we wanted to see it. So this is just the board's policy. So that's how I would address that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
yes, Billy.
Okay, I've been with the city since 1972. So during the course of that, many of these actuary studies have been done, change in benefits, you ask for actuary study. And in all that time, they've used the board's rate. Walter Moore was mayor when the Beaver was established for police and fire.
Both.
And, yeah, in the general city, and they used those boards' assumption rates at that time. They didn't bring in their own rates, and a range is not 3.5 and 7. That's not a range, that's just two different numbers. A range goes from, say, 6 to 12. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. But two numbers is not a range. And since we have had numerous actuary studies, I see that we should vote for this. And when the IRS, if the IRS comes, because we don't know what the IRS is gonna say, we'll respond to the IRS when they present it.
Madam Mayor.
Hi. So, yeah, as we're talking these ranges and percentages, what percentage, Mr. Livingston, you did say that you knew that with 3.5% of the funding value would come back at 120%. What did we get that figure? Was that run, has the board run that figure? Or
The
did you get
actuary
that from
presented
somewhere?
that at the July meeting, or the June meeting.
June meeting.
The actuary has already run that meeting.
No, she
She
didn't,
presented that
she
at
was,
the
that
April
was the
meeting.
best.
So actuary has already run that
She
particular
did some
study.
very rough
Yeah.
estimates
Okay.
of changing the discount rate, that's correct.
So we already ran it at 3.5%, and
No, we
that
did
did
not.
not change.
No,
Well, she has the funding value, so it shows that it was running that amount for some time.
No, no,
So I don't know
no.
where we're.
No, no, no.
Where did she get the figure?
She whiteboarded it.
Can I,
She whiteboarded
can
it.
I
She was
click-
just doing it off the
yeah.
top of her head.
offer, it was off the top of her head,
Okay,
she
so
made
we
it,
have that,
she
so
gave
we got
her,
that, all right.
she
Okay.
gave a disclosure
All
that,
right, thank you for
this is nothing scientific
So,
about
by-
this. Can
by
you
doing that-
allow me to answer the question without
I was asking
running
this
over?
dumb question.
I understand, but I'm
Okay.
trying to clarify your answer.
She's the expert.
That has nothing to do with the.
I'm calling for the vote, I'm tired of this
You know,
back and
'cause you
forth.
know
Call
that.
for the vote, let's vote it up or down. So,
Right, okay,
call for
vote
the
has
vote.
been called for, okay? Is there, all in favor of approving the motion? Say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Okay.
I abstain.
All right. So the motion passes. The actuarial policy has been amended. Okay, what's next, Deborah?
Next item, there is another spreadsheet in your agenda
Sorry.
that has $10 million in column J.
Is this the one?
That's not it. It's
No,
the
this
green
isn't the one, but it has,
Yeah.
and it has a green arrow on it, but in column J, there's $10 million.
Is that in the handout?
It's in the handout.
one. Column K.
In column K, this one.
$3 million, that's what I have to.
We added,
I'm sorry, yes, column K, there's $10 million.
You said blue arrow, right here.
yeah.
Oh, I got it, and it's a blue arrow.
You know, next time we just change the colors to something.
No, that's a different one.
No, I didn't have any of these tabs. I had the other ones.
It's the one with 10 million in Ireland.
In the future, why don't
We will
We will.
not
This-
provide.
so we say.
This came up at the finance committee where it was like, oh, we need to do good cash flow, so that's where it got confused. So it all came about yesterday afternoon, so we apologize for.
And Stephen and I will coordinate that.
Okay, does everyone have it? That's the one in item K, is a 10 million.
Okay, so you see in column H where we are adjusting the proposed target allocation, which you just passed. You'll notice in column J, you see the over and under allocations for each asset class. We do need to raise cash for benefits, and we thought it would be prudent to raise cash through the end of December. So what you see in column K is that we're going to reduce the mid-cap Piedmont account by $10 million to raise cash for benefits and expenses through December 31st. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, we have to, what about January, since we won't be meeting?
We'll still have about, I think, $1.8 million, so we could pay bills and do things like that, but yes, we will need to raise cash in January.
But we won't have to do it until the meeting.
Until the end of January.
To then January.
Because we meet December, first week of December, but then there's no meeting in December.
Oh, no, we could raise cash, yeah, we could raise cash in December.
Yes.
But we don't meet in December.
You meet
December
December 4th.
December fourth.
Fourth or third?
Yeah.
In the end of November,
Oh.
instead of the end of November.
Because November meeting, I believe, gets pushed to early December because of
Because of
Thanksgiving.
So we meet December 3rd and 4th.
Yeah, and so then at that meeting, we could raise, do a motion to raise cash for January, February.
Does that answer your question, Billy?
Yes.
Is there any further questions, comments, concerns? Okay. So what is it that you would ask of us?
That you would approve the consultant's recommendation to raise $10 million to pay for cash, or to pay for benefits and expenses, and we would raise the cash from Piedmont.
Move. It's been moved. Support. And we have a proper motion before us. Is there any further questions, comments, or concerns? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it, and so ordered. Okay, what's next?
And the last handout that you received in your agenda was a notice from Piedmont. Again, why don't I let you take that?
Yeah, so Piedmont, one of their co-portfolio managers on the SMID allocation, Richard Mills, he departed the firm. We have an allocation to mid-cap, and it's a passive index, so it just mirrors the index. Mr. Mills was on the active side, picking stocks for this mid-cap allocation, so it doesn't impact our investment directly, but based on our standard operating procedure, if a senior member of any investment team leaves, we just keep an eye on them, we put them on official watch list to see if there are any other departures. As a sign of something else that we don't know about. So at this point, we recommend just putting them on watch, keeping an eye on them, and see if any other departures
Is
happen.
there a time limit on like when?
Usually it's 2 quarters.
2 quarters?
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else?
No?
No, sir.
Okay, so we then move on to the legal report?
We do that resolution to put them on watch.
Okay, is there a mover?
So moved.
Is it moved? Support, on putting Piedmont on watch? Is there a support for, it's been supported. Any further questions, comments, or concerns in terms of putting Piedmont on watch? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it, so ordered. Okay, now we move to the legal report, is that correct? We've handled all the new business, add-ons and everything else, so now we'll go to the legal report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of items to report on. The first, I was asked to review the Addicts Asset Management Investment Agreement. I provided a copy under Exhibit A of my memo regarding that agreement. I think this has already been obviously covered because you've approved the documents. So unless you want me to go through my memo in detail, I'm good with providing that for informational purposes. Item number 2, the cruise subpoena under Exhibit B. I've attached a copy of a subpoena that we received and my email to the executive director as far as how to respond to that subpoena. Item number C. Item number 3, which is under Exhibit C, I've attached a copy of my email to the executive director answering specific questions that were raised regarding the disability reexamination policies. This may be in committee, I'm not sure.
This is in committee, this is before the personnel committee, but we haven't addressed it yet.
Okay, so this, the board can read it. If anybody has any questions, feel free, but once it goes through committee, correct, it'll be in front of the board. And then item number 5, I've attached your Robbins Geller August 2019 portfolio monitoring report. And you can see there were some cases that were filed where the system did incur losses during the class period. And those losses we would file proof of claims as they settle so that this system can share in those recoveries. That's for trustee information. And then the last item, the fees received have not changed. And that would conclude my report, Mr. Chairman, unless anybody has additional questions or comments.
Do we have any closed session items?
I do have one item for closed session.
Okay, on those things that have been reported on thus far from legal, is there any questions or concerns on those? Hearing none, are you asking them now that we go into closed session?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
Oh, that's.
Yes, we need a roll call vote.
Ballard,
Yes.
we have to give the kind of broad brush, right? We're going into closed session for the
To
purpose
discuss
of
the Camping World Holdings litigation.
pending litigation. Okay.
Ballard,
Yes.
Giddings,
Yes.
Mariani,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Swazer,
Yes.
Walker,
Yes.
D. Waterman, P. Waterman,
yes.
White,
Yes.
And council has asked only trustees